Pulled the power washer out the other day, tried to use it, and it wouldn't start. And this is because the last time I used it, I just put it away and it sat all winter. I never winterized it, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. And when it wouldn't start, I knew exactly what happened. The carburetor gets gummed up from sitting with gas in it all winter, and it just really needs to be cleaned, put back together, and I'm sure it'll start right up. I'm not gonna lie, I probably do it every single year because I'm too lazy to winterize everything. So this is just something I do all the time. The first thing I would do is take these two 8mm screws out to get this top cover off so you can see what you're working with the linkage for the carburetor. Next we'll take the front of the air box off. Get the air filter out of the way. To get the backside of this air box out, there's three 8mm screws here. We'll take those out. Mine has a little vent here you got to take out. Next we'll get this fuel line out of the way. If you have fuel in your tank, either drain it or, have something to catch the fuel. This fuel line's very old and hard. One thing I'd like to point out is after sitting all winter, if you come out and the power washer starts up with the choke on, and then once it warms up and you turn the choke off and it shuts off and it'll only run with the choke on, this usually indicates that one of the jets is clogged up, and so it's running lean. So when you turn the choke on, it richens it up and it'll run because you're restricting airflow. And here's the governor. This operates the throttle plate, and there's a little spring here attached to it. So we'll take that off. Get that out of the way. So there's two on mine. They're 10mm bolts holding the carburetor on right here. We're going to take those out now. Now we're going to take the carburetor off, and we have to make sure we get it out of the choke arm here and get the governor linkage out. So that's just going to require us to tilt it. So once we get it out, like out of the choke arm, this little arm, just you need to turn it and it'll pop off, and that's it. You can see here the throttle plate that the governor operates to control engine RPM, and then this is our choke again. Alright, so now that we have the carburetor off, I recommend putting a rag or something like this down so that you don't lose any parts, because there's a lot of little parts. So the first thing we'll do is we'll take the bowl off. This is the bowl of the carburetor. can see that there's a little gasket on this. Be mindful that you don't lose that. Well, that's not good. You can see that my gasket broke when I took the bowl off, so I'm gonna have to get a new gasket for mine, but it won't change what we're doing. This is the float. This is the float shaft. When the bowl is on, it holds this shaft from coming out. This float operates a little needle valve. You can see it right in here. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. And it pulls it up and down. So what we can do is we'll take this float shaft out. Take the float off. You can see that the needle valve, the needle, the seat is in there, comes out with it. This needle valve controls the fuel level in the bowl. So when the float comes up and down, it opens and closes that needle valve, which controls the fuel supply from the fuel line. One thing to look out for is you don't want fuel in the float, because it obviously isn't going to float correctly if it's full of fuel. So if there's fuel in the float, it needs to be fixed or replaced. A lot of times it's just easier to replace the entire carburetor than it is to buy individual parts. On this particular carburetor, the jet is actually the bolt that holds the bowl on. So when we took it apart, this was holding the bowl on. Well, this is actually the jet. So also, I don't know if you can see, but you can see that there's a little seat in there for the needle. So we'll just spray this out with some carburetor cleaner. We'll spray this jet out with some carburetor cleaner. I found the best thing to use to clean these jets are torch tip cleaners. If you don't have that, you could use a tiny drill bit, but be careful not to enlarge the hole. Make sure you spray out these little holes. Also, since you have the bowl off, you can see that there's some build up in here. I would spray that out too. And I would just spray the carburetor out as well. If you have an air hose, you can spray this out a little bit, but be very careful that you don't blow anything out of the carburetor. When I was a kid, I remember I had a carburetor and I was blowing a bunch of high pressure air in there and blew some parts out, and I don't even know what I lost back then. So I just like to blow this out really gently. And then the jet, I would blow through these little holes. Okay, now we can reassemble it. Mine clearly needs a new gasket. I'm just going to reassemble it for demonstration. I'm going to have to get a new gasket for it later, or figure out a way to reseal it. So ignore that. So you can see our needle here for the needle valve. So what you're going to do is take the float, and you can see that there's a spot right here to put the needle valve. So what I'll do is just slide the needle valve in there. Kind of just hangs in there. And then drop it in where the needle goes. And then we're going to put our float shaft, just kind of adjust it to get it into the right place. Just pop that back in there. You can see that's how your float works. You see the needle valve right here. When the fuel level is low, the needle valve's open. The float floats up and closes the needle valve. So it can control the level of fuel in the bowl. Like I said before, the bowl goes on either side of this shaft, and that's going to hold it in. So now you're just going to take your jet with the seal on it. Make sure that you put that back and screw that in. Put the bowl back on the carburetor. Snug that up. And we're good to put the carburetor back on. So now we're just basically going to do everything in reverse. So mine, my carburetor has an O-ring here. Yours may have a paper gasket, and if you do have a paper gasket, when you take it off, it may rip. So be mindful of that. You may have to get a new gasket or use, RTV or something to reseal it. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to hook the governor linkage back on first, because it has to be tilted. So we'll tilt this over and reconnect that linkage, and then pop the choke arm in. And reinstall 2 bolts holding the carburetor on. Next we'll reinstall our fuel line. Pop that on the fuel tank. Pop the other end on the carburetor. Make sure to put your clamp back on. Next thing I'm going to do is reinstall this governor spring. Now we can reinstall the back side of this air box. Just bolts right to the carburetor. So just make sure you put this vent back in that hose. I do that first and then just pop it on here. Now we can install our air filter. and the front side of our air box. So these just drop into these little slots and then picks up. And then you can put this 8mm screw back in. Now we can reinstall our top cover. If you look at these screws, they're slightly different than the other ones. These screws have a shoulder, and the cover kind of just floats on that. And so that's so you can't smash the plastic. So we'll put that on. I like to put both in like 3/4 of the way to help line it up first. And then you can snug them down. That shoulder will bottom out against the metal that you're bolting it into. And see, you can kind of tell the cover still floats a little bit. And that's it.